In Revelation 13:15 we read, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed." To better understand the beast and its image, prophetic definitions must be shared. In prophecy, we find that the word beast is defined as a kingdom. Daniel 7:23 says, "Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces." Of course, in today's world, we use the term nation when speaking of kingdoms. However, even in today's modern world, we see governments using beasts to depict them in politics. For example, the USA is the eagle, Russia is the bear, and China is the dragon, just to name a few. But what nation is Daniel depicting in this passage? Well, in verse 17, Daniel states the following, "These great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth." Anyone with a competent knowledge of world history knows there have only been 4 global kingdoms on this planet since time began. Babylon was the first that ruled all the known civilized world. Medo-Persia was the second, the Greek Empire of Alexander was third, and the Romans stood as the fourth. On my Dream of a King page on the website, I show how Daniel and historic record confirm this in much more detail. See the link that you see on the screen now. Now, moving on. We find something strange is to occur with this fourth kingdom that's never occurred before with any other kingdom. As we saw in Daniel 7:23, he says this nation will be diverse or different from any other nation. Well, how is it different? Well, Revelation 17:3 says, "I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast." Since we know a beast is a nation, what does this woman that is riding this beast, or this final kingdom in Revelation 17 speaking of? Well, Jeremiah 6:2 says, "I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman." In other words, in prophecy, a woman is a church. Now, even a babe in Christ knows that Jesus often portrayed his church as his bride all throughout Scripture. However, if you need to see the passages in question that define the woman and the beast in a lot more detail, please visit the URLs you see on the screen right now. Now, since the prophecy of Daniel 7:17 states that there will only be 4 global kingdoms, we are to look for a nation today that is a woman on a beast or a church and state corporation. As educated students of prophecy, we know this can only be defined by the Roman Catholic Vatican. Basic reality is, the Vatican is officially recognized as the sovereign nation of Vatican City by all nations in the world today. We also know by the daily activities of this nation in the mainstream media that it is also depicted and recognized as a church by all the nations of the world. So how did this transformation from pagan Roman Empire to papal Roman Church come about? Revelation 13:4 gives us a clue. It says, "And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast." And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who was like unto the beast, and who was able to make war with him?" So who was the dragon in prophecy? According to Revelation 12, verse 9, the dragon is Satan. Revelation 12:9 says, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan." As we know, Satan never stands before man in his true form. He's not allowed this option. 1 Corinthians 10:13 explains why. So, he must rely on men that love his lies over God's truth to do his will. At this time in history, when the dragon was attacking the Christian faith, it was Rome he chose to administer his hatred with. This is not something anyone needs convincing of. It is an open fact of historic record that Romans killed Christians, but does the Vatican acknowledge it has been given the keys as a global kingdom from pagan Rome, so as to solidify this prophecy stating that it's still that 4th global kingdom that was there in pagan Rome days? Well, Pope Pius IX, in his Discourse on page 253 said, "The Caesar, who now addresses you, and to whom alone are obedience and fidelity due." It is also found in historic record that the Catholic Church will not descend into the tomb. It will survive the empire. At length, a second empire will arise, and of this empire the Pope will be the master. More than this, he will be the master of Europe. He will dictate his orders to kings who will obey him. For a more in-depth look at all the other symbols mentioned here in Revelation 17:3, see the Antichrist video link that you see on the screen before you. And if you want even more information, see the second link on the screen. Okay, assuming for the moment that you're either a student of prophecy or you have checked out all the videos and the websites that I posted regarding all this, you then realize what prophecy says about who the beast is and who the woman riding on the beast is. To further clarify, the beast is a nation, which in this case is Vatican City, and the woman is a church, which in this case is the Roman Catholic Church. The simple truth here is that there is no other nation on earth that has merged with a church that did in fact come to power 1,474 years ago, which, by the way, will have a political influence on all nations in the end of days. Only the Roman Catholic Vatican can make this claim today. The Vatican not only has a seat in the United Nations as a nation, it also holds that seat as a church. Still, some may believe that other historic or modern-day entities on earth at present can stake such a claim as the Vatican so as to pull the onus off the Vatican. This is, in fact, a favored tactic of Rome to hide their true fruits. After all, if Satan hides behind Roman soldiers to kill Christians, the Vatican will also hide behind others to do the same. Just as Christians have fruits of Christ, followers of the devil will have fruits of Satan. Still, to those that assume another can stand as a woman on a beast today, I would like to make it clear unto you that you cannot pick and choose which prophecy fits your desired choice, while at the same time ignoring the other symbols that prove your choice cannot possibly be the correct one. Every prophecy must point to the same exact place for it to be a valid definition. What I mean is, some claim Islam, for example, is the woman on the beast by using a few key prophecies. However, there are many other prophecies that identify this woman and beast entity that Islam simply cannot pull off or even hope to fulfill. To name just a few, for example, every name of the Pope throughout history has always equaled 666 when you use their Latin language, which also happens to be the Roman numeral system. In other words, when you write their name in Latin, you can also add up the Latin lettering that doubles as Roman numerals. When doing so, they always add up to 666. Well, Islam fails here. Prophecy also says 3 nations must fall for the Vatican to be able to be set up as a woman on a beast. Islam never did this, but Rome saw the 3rd nation fall, and when it did, it brought about their church and state power in 538 A.D. See the links that are showing up on the screen as I go through these. There's quite a few evidences of this posted online, with all the documentation that you're going to need to share these truths with others. Now, prophecy also states this woman and global beast must reside on 7 hills. Again, Islam can't stake this claim. Prophecy predicts as well that this woman and beast will run rampant across the land to kill hundreds of millions of Christians for 1,260 years. Now, yes, the Nation of Islam kills Christians, but they fall far short of doing so for 1,260 years that the prophecy speaks of. The Vatican came to power in 538 A.D. For exactly 1,260 years, they killed over 500 million Christians, until Napoleon removed their political status in the exact year of 1798, which is exactly 1,260 years from 538. Prophecy also declares this woman and beast would be mortally wounded. It would die, and then actually resurrect back into power as a way to mock the Lord's death and resurrection. This Islam has never done either. Yet the Vatican came to power in 538 as a church and state. Then in 1798 it was mortally wounded by Napoleon and died politically. But later it was resurrected in 1929 when Mussolini and Carlo Gaspari signed the treaty in the Lateran Palace, making the Vatican a church and state power once again. Now prophecy also states that the man placed at the head of this church and state conglomerate that prophecy depicts as a woman riding on a beast will demand to be called a god on earth in numerous well-documented statements for all the world to see. Muhammad never demanded such a thing. Prophecy also states that this woman on the beast will embrace paganism in a major way. Islam fails here as well. And just to name one more, out of literally hundreds of prophecy Islam cannot fulfill, the prophet Daniel predicted that this woman on a beast entity would try to change the seventh-day Bible Sabbath and cause all of the world to follow its lead. Not only have the popes of Rome admitted to this act in writing many times, every Christian church on earth, including the Jews and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, have embraced Sunday as the Sabbath recently. All churches, except, of course, the Lord's remnant people, are involved in pushing forth Sunday laws right now, just as the prophecy also predicted. So, truth is, not only has Islam never done any of this, they, like everyone else, will be forced to do as Rome demands when it comes to the global Sunday laws headed our way very soon. It's no mistake Yasser Arafat bowed in worship before the Pope on camera just before he died. That political act will assure all Muslims will keep Sunday as Sabbath just as every other church will do, except, of course, God's remnant people. Now, I just shared a smattering of prophetic facts that effectively define the Roman Catholic Vatican as indeed the prophesied beast. It is also the church and state conglomerate, just as anyone with a competent knowledge of national politics can tell you. Now, if you would like to have all the documentation to the claims I just made, as well as an in-depth list regarding prophetic fulfillments concerning all of this, see the link that you have on the screen right now. Now that we know who the beast in Revelation 17:3 is, what is prophecy talking about when it speaks about the image of the beast, and why does it even mention such a thing as being something Christians need to concern themselves with? Well, in Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15, we learn about another beast, one that comes out of the earth that has two horns around the time the Vatican falls to Napoleon. The Roman Church fell politically in 1798, as we just learned, and the United States of America came into being in 1776. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into defining all of this in detail. However, if you are unaware of this prophetic fact and would like the details confirmed, please see the link you have on the screen right now. Okay, so in Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15, we read that the United States is prophesied to make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause, that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Now, since the Vatican is a church as well as a sovereign state according to modern-day governmental law, it not only has the authority to influence political law as it pertains to all citizens that are residents of certain member nations of the United Nations, Vatican City is also the official voice for the church in all the United Nations meetings. They literally have church and state power right now on a global level in every meeting done at the United Nations assemblies, just like they did in 538 AD. So, how does America cause this image to come to be, and how does it give it life so that the image can both speak and cause, as verse 15 suggests? Well, in 1954, Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson introduced Section 501c3 to the modern tax code that caused all churches to be added to the list of organizations that could benefit from tax-exempt status. Now, yes, the church pastors already enjoyed tax-exempt status when it came to their income thanks to the Constitution, but Satan knew that the love of money would move the pastors to bow to this golden carrot the government was now dangling. I mean, after all, prophecy predicted the pastors would eventually become preachers of filthy lucre anyway. What Johnson did with the 501c3 was to make it possible to have tax-exempt status for churches so as to purchase items for the church. For example, before the 501c3, a pastor had to pay sales tax on buying a building, a car, or anything else for ministerial duties. Only his income was tax-exempt. But with the new 501c3 code of Senator Johnson, the pastor could now enjoy tax-exempt status here as well. Only problem was, the pastor also had to agree never to make political statements from his pulpit under the new tax-exempt arrangement. You see, Johnson didn't like the way the pastors were able to manipulate the vote so easily at each election. He, like any other politician, knew that most church members trusted their pastors. They also knew if a pastor or a collection of pastors disliked a particular candidate for public office, they could simply speak of their dislike during a sermon a few days before the polls opened, and that candidate would not be in office the following week. Being blinded by the money to be had, most pastors instinctively agreed to the 501c3 restrictions, so they naturally signed on to it. Then, as expected, the government simply waited a few decades to make sure every greedy pastor in the nation was signed on to the 501c3 before dropping the other shoe. Just like any new laws with such radical restrictions, they allow the law to idle on until enough citizens embrace it. The truth is, this is exactly how Rome has always created new doctrines for the church that had no biblical jurisprudence behind them whatsoever. They come up with an idea, then watch how the people react to it. If it is embraced by the people, they make it canon law, and the rest is history. In fact, a Vatican cardinal just admitted to this just 4 days ago when he was put to the task as to why certain Vatican II changes were still confusing to Catholics after 50 years. No, they're not so much confused as they are resistant to such radical changes. But as we know, choosing one's words carefully when speaking publicly has become an art for Vatican prelates. So anyway, the article is titled, Confusion After Vatican II Matches Pattern of Church History. And this is what he says in the article. He says, Church history shows that it is common for decades to pass before the faithful fully adjust to the teachings of a council. He notes that Christological disputes continued to rage for a century after the Council of Nicaea. Frankly, even the Council of Trent was not very fruitful until the Golden Jubilee of 1596. Now, Rome knows radical changes outside the written Word of God have always caused problems for them, so they learned to let the changes fester in the background for a few decades, or even centuries in some cases, until the decadence of mankind sank low enough to embrace it as an acceptable doctrine. That being said, this is also why certain laws that go against the Constitution are allowed to simmer on, like the 501c3, which was never officially enforced until March of 2006, even though it was signed, sealed, and delivered 52 years earlier in 1954. And yes, this is also why Sunday laws that were implemented in 1961 by Roman Catholic President John F. Kennedy have yet to be enforced. Like Rome, Washington, D.C. is merely waiting for the perfect time to enforce that which has already passed. The Vatican-controlled Senate knows how to best bring about the control they seek just as much as their teacher in Rome does now. In fact, Rome has taken D.C. just as prophecy predicted they would. See my March of 2006 Truth Provided newsletter. The link's on the screen right now. Of course, those of us that study and teach prophecy knew better than to sign on to the 501c3 when we were called to do this work for the Lord. Besides the fact we preach for the souls and not for the cash that they have on hand, we also knew that by signing such a document as this, we would not be able to expose the beast in Rome. Now, I've seen this happen all too often, and especially in the SDA Church, where most pastors did expose the Vatican beast for years. As word got out and the day to enforce came nearer, the IRS simply approached those pastors one by one and let them know they needed to stop, or else. If they refused, they would have their 501c3 tax-exempt status revoked, and everything they purchased over the years would be subject to excise taxes and penalties as well. Of course, they opted to go with the money rather than the Lord, and did as the IRS commanded. Amazing, isn't it? 2,000 years ago, when the apostles were told by the governing leaders to stop preaching the gospel truth, we see that Acts 5:29 says, Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Well, look around, and you will see that today the overwhelming majority of preachers did as the governing leaders demanded of them, and ignored what God commanded instead. These weak leaders are what Jesus described as hirelings in John chapter 10. They are more concerned with self than the flock that they are called to shepherd. So the question remains, how does the USA give life unto the image of the beast? Well, on March 7th, 2006, the Bush administration put into law a brand new executive order number 13397 that removes the separation of church and state. With the stroke of that pen, Bush nullified the biblical direction of Jesus Christ in Luke chapter 20, verses 22 to 26 regarding the separation of church and state. That act alone was prophetic in nature. Just as students of prophecy expected, it forced all churches holding a 501c3 tax ID number to officially become government agencies on that day. Strangely enough, this came almost exactly 1 year after Pope John Paul II demanded the following. Headline, Church and State can cooperate, says Pope. John Paul II believes that the church and state can and must collaborate in their service to the person and the common good, with relations of autonomy and difference. Now, this is something Rome has been working towards for eons. In fact, John Paul II was very active in his agenda towards removing this biblical form of government from society all along. Within 3 years of becoming pope, it says in Time magazine that John Paul was criticized by liberal and moderate politicians and newspapers for transgressing the boundary between church and state. Now, John Paul II performed many other political acts during his pontificate that guaranteed his attack on the church would hold firm once Bush signed that law into existence, but I won't be going into that here. Most of my main website was dedicated to exposing this man for years. Almost every newsletter was based on something he did that would affect every soul on earth after he died. So I won't go into that here, as it would take quite a while to cover just a fraction of it all. But if you want this information, please visit the links you see on the screen right now. Now, yes, I understand there are still some 501c3 preachers out there preaching the Pope as Antichrist without so much as a slap on the wrist. However, if you notice, the ones that used to preach it for decades suddenly stopped. Some like Jack Van Impe actually apologized on the air for calling the Pope Antichrist. Then suddenly new preachers no one heard of before came forward and started to preach the Pope as Antichrist. And now, if you read the wording of the law, you will find that they are actually doing so illegally. That being said, this leaves only 3 possible options as to why they are allowed to continue. Number 1, the IRS has yet to approach them. Number 2, they reside in a country without 501c3 tax-free status. Or, number 3, they are actually working directly with the Vatican as well as the government to further confuse the masses. The reason they stop 501c3 preachers from exposing the Pope, even though the preachers see no wrong in doing so because he is a leader of an evil church organization, the IRS proclaims that they have to stop anyway because the Pope is also the head of a state. The 501c3 prohibits political speech on all church pulpits under the new 501c3 tax code, but, as is obvious, all the churches signing on don't understand, let alone teach prophecy anyway, so, as expected, they simply didn't see any danger here. They only saw dollar signs. Still, how does this have anything to do with the image of the beast? Now, what I'm about to share may shock some of you and even upset you, especially if you are presently a member of a church that has 501c3 status. In order to receive the 501c3 status from the United States government, you must first join your church with the state of origin in which it sits. In other words, you must incorporate your church. Once you do this, you are literally a church and state power, just like the woman riding on the beast in Rome is. Or as prophecy declares it, your church is now an image to that beast. And here's the clincher that most people fail to see right off in all of this. On March 7, 2006, George W. Bush gave life onto the image of this beast by granting all 501c3 churches the power to actually lobby law. He even declared the churches are to be considered official government agencies in a televised national announcement that day. Now, IRS.gov clearly outlines the legal options as to how churches can lobby law on their website. You can get more information about this by visiting the URL you see on the screen now. And yes, as expected, the IRS website is a very confusing website and not very easy to surf. But there are many websites that do outline in easy-to-understand layman terms as to how the 501c3 organizations can, in fact, lobby law. One such site is the Center for Association Leadership. Their URL is on the screen right now. Now, once again, Revelation 13:15 says, "And he," speaking of the USA, of course, "had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause, that as many as would not worship the beast should be killed." Seeing how this is a nation that is being discussed here in Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15, how, I ask, does a nation speak? They legislate. And how does a nation cause that which they speak to come into fruition? Once legislation is passed, they cause it to be enforced by passing the bill that is brought to the Senate floor. As we speak, and just as prophecy predicted, all 501c3 churches across America right now stand as a church and state power and do, in fact, have the power to pass laws based on both political as well as religious causes, just as the beast in Rome has done since 538 AD. And just as prophecy predicted, it is the United States government that has given this power to the churches in America. Thank you for watching. God bless.